Hello, hello. Welcome to Loki's Librarian. I am your librarian, Katrina. If you are new here, welcome. This is where I am reading through the enormous library of books you see behind me, and then I give you a quick synopsis and tell you what I think of them. So if you like books, just aren't sure what to read next, hit that subscribe button, like and share my videos. Let me know what you think in the comments. A few weeks ago, I started adding booze to my books, and I've been trying to find cocktails that have something in common with the book of the week. However, I was unable to find what I wanted to drink with this week's book of the week, which is Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. I had hoped to find some kumis, which is Mongolian fermented mare's milk, or arak, which is that same fermented mare's milk distilled. This is apparently a specialty item, and you cannot, at least I could not find it here in Reno. I mean, they had arak, but it was Lebanese arak, so it was from wine, or not from wine, from grapes, not from mare's milk. So I had to go with a cocktail, and I found one called a Mongolian motherfucker, which had an absolutely insane amount of alcohol.
A man drink like that and he don't eat, he is going to die.
So instead I went for the easier and hopefully yummier choice of a Mongolian Dingbat. Now, this week's book is one I've read before, and I really enjoyed it, so I thought I'd read it again and I refreshed my memory on how awesome Genghis Khan was. Yeah, awesome. I know, y'all are, what? He was a conqueror, he was evil, he destroyed the world. Actually, no. He did quite a bit more than just destroy the world. Far more than any other conquerors. And we're going to go into all of that. The axiom is that history is written by the winners. Sometimes it is rewritten by very sore losers. So let's do this. Now, this is a blended drink, so bear with me here. Oh, lock that bitch down. Genghis Khan was born in the spring of 1162. We don't know exactly when, but it was the spring of 1162. And his name was not Genghis, it was Temujin. He was named after a rival clan's warrior that his father had slain. You need 1 ounce of white rum. So, his mother, Holin, and I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, I very well may be, and if I am sorry. She was from the Maligned tribe, which was basically considered a tribe of great beauties. She was on her way to her new home with her husband, Chilidu, when a hunter spotted them. This hunter quickly gathered up 2 brothers and engaged in one of the 2 accepted ways of getting a bride. The first, which had been paid by Chilidu, was to perform bride service, basically for the bride's family. So you would work for the father, show that you were a good worker and could be a good provider, and you would get a bride out of this. The second was kidnapping. Now, when Holin saw the hunters coming over the hill, she advised Chilidu to leave her behind, or their attackers would kill him. She knew that she was the prize they were after. So Chilidu fled, and Holin began her new life as the second wife of Yasuge. Yeah. They allowed for multiple wives. This wasn't a religious thing so much as I think a practical thing. I'm pretty sure the women outnumbered the men because the men tend to kill each other. And you know, genetic biology, this is something that's pretty true all over. Okay, 1 ounce of coffee liqueur. Coffee liqueur. Chilidu has been kidnapped, or I'm not sorry, Chilidu has fled. We never hear from him again. That was his one contribution to history, was getting Holin to the point where she was kidnapped. Legend has it that when he was born, Temujin came into this world holding a blood clot from his mother's womb in his tiny little hand. Now, Holin did not know what this portended. I mean, it could be a sign of great things to come, or it could be an ill omen, and it could be a little bit of both, and we're going to go into all of that. Given the history that follows, it seems likely that he was born in blood, would lead men in battle, but it was also a sign of both. When Temujin was 9, he and his father set out to find a suitable bride for him, with the expectation that, unlike Yasuke, Temujin would work to earn his bride. The original intent was to go to the Merkid and basically try and strengthen that bond that had been broken when Yasuke stole Holin versus working for her. But on the way there, a closer family was found to likely girl Borte. Temujin and Borte got along well, so the deal was struck, and Temujin was left there to work for and earn his bride. Yasuge returned home. On his way back, he sees a clan of the Tatar tribe. Now, Temujin, the Temujin that Yasuge had slain, was from the Tatar tribe. Yasuge thought he could slip in as just another traveler and not be recognized. He thought wrong, and sometime during the night, somebody slipped him poison. Well, we don't know what it was. Whatever it was slow acting. Yesige made it home, managed to send a messenger to retrieve Temujin, who barely made it home before Yesige died. Now, Holin and Yesige's first wife, Xochitl, were in a pickle. Traditionally, one of the brothers who had helped kidnap Holin would have taken in her and Xochitl and their children into his family. That would not have been uncommon. That was how they ensured everybody stayed together and the women and children were taken care of. But while not his first wife, Holin was certainly a favorite and a prolific mother. She bore, and all 5 of her children managed to survive to adulthood. Xochitl had 2, this being a small, rather poor tribe. Neither brother was in a position to accept 9 more mouths to feed. So the Taichiad tribe, which is what they were, set out to abandon them all to their fate. One man of the tribe objected. He was killed for having an opinion. All of this was witnessed by 9-year-old Temujin. Holin, having a clear-headedness and fierceness which clearly her son inherited, grabbed up her dead husband's spirit banner, chased after the fleeing Taichiad. She fled after the fleeing Taichiad, shamed them into returning to camp, which lasted a few hours. During the night, the rest of the tribe snuck away, leaving Holin, Xochitl, and the children to their fate. And this is desperate times, and this is where Temujin's core personality starts to really form. In the tribal cultures of the steppes, the oldest boy was now the head of the family, and everyone was supposed to obey him without question. The oldest boy was not Temujin. It was his half-brother, 10-year-old Begtar, who was a bit of a bully. Temujin disliked bullies. So when Temujin and his younger brother Kasar were out hunting and brought down a bird, Begtar demanded that they give him their kill. Temujin was outraged. He complained to Holin, who supported Begtar. He was the oldest son. It was his job to protect and feed the family. If he said to give him the bird, give him the bird. Seeing his life unfolding as being lesser than this bullying brother, Temujin and his brother Kasar hunted down Begtar and killed him. Fratricide is it's an acknowledged but not exactly favored method of advancement in the West. On the steppes of Mongolia, it was very much a crime. Holin immediately knew what they had done and began screaming at them for their crime, and this act made the entire family, because she didn't just kick him out, they were all a band of criminals. And word of the deed, even though basically it was just the family that knew, spread quickly, and it reached the Taichiad. While they had no problem abandoning the family to the whims of fate, they also had no problem capturing Temujin and keeping him as a slave for his crime. So, it's not really known how long he was a slave, long enough to recognize the evils of slavery, at least when it was Mongol enslaving Mongol. He didn't think that they should be enslaving each other. And long enough to appreciate the kind family that helped him to escape. He would later repay their kindness. Now, by the time all of these events played out, the death of his father, the murder of his brother, the enslavement, 7 years passed. It's now 1178, Temujin is 16. He returned to his bride's family, hoping that she was still available, and apparently she was. This was a genuine love match. Borte was his queen, and she had waited for him. The two were married and headed towards home with a bride gift from Borte's family of a heavy sable coat. Now, here is where Temujin's understanding of steppe politics stood him in very good stead. 1 scoop of ice cream. So, politics. He understood the politics very well. After depositing Borte with his mother, Temujin took the sable coat to Torghil, aka Ong Khan, of the Karyid tribe. Now, Ong Khan had been his father Yasuge's Anda, meaning blood brother, basically. If Ong Khan accepted the coat as a gift, he was acknowledging Temujin as kind of a spiritual son, like a stepson, foster son. This would afford the family protection and a place to live, which very much needed, right? The steppes are a cruel place. It is a survival of the strongest sort of situation here. Ong Khan did accept the coat, which granted the entire family protection. Temujin returned home and prepared to start his life as a hunter with his wife and a small but loyal band of followers. Enter another aspect of steppe life, a persistent history of revenge. Blended drink. Oh, I'm lucky that didn't make a huge mess. I forgot to close it. Anyways. For the kidnapping of Holon 18 years previously, the Merkid now sought vengeance on Temujin's family by kidnapping Borte. Temujin and his family were sleeping when an old woman, who had no kinship ties to the family, incidentally, this is indicative of the kindness that Temujin had, which you don't typically associate with Genghis Khan, but he was kind, and he had a heart, and he appreciated people who were down on their luck and needed help. And so they had met this old woman on the steppe who had no family, nowhere to go. She'd basically been abandoned like his own mother, and so he took him in. She repaid that by hearing the approaching horses. So it's night. She woke everybody up. Temujin and his hunters fled. This was standard, okay? The way at the steppe was to let the warriors flee if they were unable to stand and fight due to numbers. For example, if you know you're going to be overrun, there is no shame or blame in living to fight another day. So they ran, and the raiding party would loot the gurs and kidnap them. And gur is their house, or basically we call it a yurt here in the West, but in Mongolia it's called a gur. There was no shame in running away. What was not the way of the steppe was to plan a counter attempt. Typically, once a wife is stolen, she's gone. And the husband could either find a new bride to perform service for, or kidnap a different wife from somebody else. Temujin, remember this was a love match, went to Khan and asked for men to lead a raid on the Merkid and retrieve Borte. Khan agreed. And with Temujin went his own childhood friend, Jamuka. Temujin and Jamuka were also, they were blood brothers in their own way. I might have to take the hat off and explain it later. They renewed their bonds after Borte was successfully retrieved, and she was. But now she's pregnant. So we don't know if the timeline, the timeline is such that they didn't know if the child was Temujin's or her kidnappers. It's one of those great mysteries we just will never know. When the child was born, Temujin never treated him any differently. He raised the boy as his own, but he named him Yochi, which means guest. And it's unclear if the name was a comment on his questionable parentage, or if the name was chosen due to Temujin's clan being a guest of Jamuka's at the time of the boy's birth. Regardless, that name choice and the mystery of Yochi's parentage later had a direct effect on the succession of the Mongolian Empire. Now, while Jamuka and Temujin, let's try this. It's not bad. You can taste the coffee. It didn't say what kind of ice cream. I went with vanilla because I thought that was a nice mellow neutral, I guess. It's not bad. You can taste the coffee. All right, the hat's coming off. While Jamuka and Temujin renewed their Anda relationship, eventually Jamuka became jealous of Temujin's popularity and natural gifts for leadership. And he had both because, contrary to whatever history might have you believe, he was not a sociopath. He liked people. He thought his people should survive, and he did what he could to make them survive, which is that leadership ability. Now, in the steppe tradition, Jamuka was from a white-boned family, meaning aristocratic. Temujin was from a black-boned family, meaning low-born. And eventually, Jamuka began treating Temujin as a second-class citizen, which confused Temujin because this is his buddy, this is his blood brother. He didn't understand why he's suddenly being treated as less than. So he went for a consultation with his mother, and Borte was present and insisted they leave. Always and forever, a good woman is going to know the worth of her man. Temujin and his followers fled in the night, traveling all night to put distance between himself and Jamuka. This happened in 1181 and formed the basis for the next 20 years of warfare between these two tribes. Now, all of this history and backstory is incredibly relevant in understanding the sweeping changes that Temujin would make, both in warfare and in governance. First off, Temujin appointed leaders unto him who were loyal versus based on kin. He based that on his own killing of his brother Begtar and his rift with Jamuka. He valued loyalty over blood ties. The second change was in how captives were treated. Temujin no longer sought retribution, he sought justice. The tribe he implemented this new policy against was the Jurchen, who were to have joined him in warfare against Jamuka, only instead of joining Temujin, they waited until he left and then raided his camp. After rounding them up, Temujin had a public trial and found the Jurchen aristocracy guilty of betraying their bonds, and he executed the leaders. Just the leaders. They were the aristocracy. The rest of the tribe he split up amongst his own followers and had them adopted into individual families, not enslaved. He insisted they be treated as family. And he set his own example here by adopting boys from each tribe they conquered into his own family as younger brothers, giving them to his mother to raise. This eliminated slavery and ensured loyalty as new family was brought in and treated like family rather than like a slave. Now, in this manner, Temujin managed to take over all the tribes in Mongolia, and he united them under his banner, including the Taichiyud tribe who had once held him as slave. And when he took them over, some 30 years after his captivity, he freed the family that had helped him to escape. He didn't even have them like absorbed into somebody else. He made them their own family because loyalty, all right? Kindness begets kindness. By far, his biggest success, though, was the Tatar tribe, the same tribe that had killed his father. As he united the smaller tribes, they were all enfolded into his Mongolian horde in this fashion, through the adoption and marriage of trusted allies. But each of the smaller tribes might number from a couple dozen to a couple hundred. The Tatar tribe numbered in the thousands. For the Tatar tribe, Temujin took 2 women as additional wives, Yesugin and Yesue. Despite the addition of the extra wives, Borte remained his undisputed queen. She was the top dog, she was the queen. Now remember how the steppe tradition was to run away, leaving the women, children, and gur behind? Traditionally, the attacking party would take the bait, raid the gur, kidnapping the women and children, leaving the men to plot retaliation for the insult. Temujin determined that no looting would occur until the fleeing men had been captured or slain. Then looting would be systematically conducted. This drastically increased the amount of loot they were able to carry. Additionally, he ordered that a soldier's share be allocated to each widower and orphan of every soldier killed. This was hugely popular among the poorest people in the tribe, but also inspired loyalty because the soldiers knew that even if they died, their family is going to be taken care of. Temujin insisted that all military units be completely mixed, doing away with old clan affiliations. He didn't allow units to form based around a clan. He basically picked people at random and said, you 10 men are a unit, you are brothers to each other, you will not fight amongst each other. You are not allowed to leave anybody behind. Leave no man behind. Usually the eldest in the 10 would be the leader, so he didn't completely do away with Mongolian tradition, but he flexed it. Owing to his own experiences, he allowed each 10 squad to choose their own leader if the eldest was not suitable. 10 squads together formed a company of 100 men, and on this, the squads together would choose who led them. So it wasn't just the oldest, it was definitely by merit at that point. 10 companies formed a battalion of 1,000 men, who again picked their leader. 10 battalions formed an army of 10,000. Those leaders were chosen directly by Temujin. Once he solidified his army, Temujin sought one more additional alliance with Ong Khan. He sought to marry his son Yochi to Ong Khan's daughter. Now, if Ong Khan had accepted this, he would be admitting that Temujin was his favored kinsman over Jamuka. Ong Khan's own son, who was nowhere near as effective as either Jamuka or Temujin, was very jealous and convinced his father not to accept the proposal. However, Ong Khan, not being a complete idiot, began to worry about Temujin's response to the rejection and plotted an ambush to take out Temujin before he could get any higher. One day's ride from the meeting place, Temujin discovered it was a trap, and he and his party fled in all directions to their pre-designated meeting place at Lake Baljuna, where, in what was seen as a sign from the eternal blue sky, a horse appeared to the starving men. They had no supplies with them, and this horse appears out of nowhere. Horses were highly relevant. They were the tribe's wealth, but they were also food animals. They would eat the horses and not think anything of it. So they killed the horse, ate the horse, and this was seen as a sign, and people flocked to Temujin's banner, including deserters from Ong Khan's camp. And he welcomed them all, provided the only betrayal of their leader was that they had left the original leader. They can't have done anything else. If they followed all of the other laws, they were more than welcome. And he won, quite handily. Ong Khan's tribe was broken and absorbed into Temujin's, and Jamuka's own tribe was torn apart and scattered. Jamuka's men tried to buy a good place with Temujin by capturing Jamuka and bringing him in. Temujin had them slaughtered. If they had just shown up on their own, he'd have welcomed them in, but that betrayal, trying to buy their way in at the cost of Jamuka, was unforgivable. He had them slaughtered in front of Jamuka for their betrayal. He tried to reconcile with his blood brother, but Jamuka refused. I don't know if he was ashamed of his past actions or if he was just too proud to join him. He asked only for an aristocrat's death, meaning that none of his blood be spilled on the earth, and then to be buried somewhere high where his spirit could watch over and guard Temujin. Both wishes were granted. And at this point, Temujin called a Kurultai, which is basically a gathering of the clans, so that they could vote for a leader. And he was unanimously voted into place as Khan of all the clans. And he took for himself the name of Genghis Khan. So this was in 1206. He was 44 years old. It's never too late to conquer the world, guys. Here are the political changes he made. These are the policies he put in place that not only shaped his people, but had long-lasting global effects. This is the great law that Genghis Khan implemented. First, he forbade the kidnapping of women. The potential for continued strife if the members of the clan kidnapped each other were too great, so he outlawed it. In conjunction to this, he forbade the abduction and enslavement of any Mongol. He declared that all children were legitimate, regardless of if the mother was a wife or concubine, regardless if it was a child of rape. All children were legitimate, would be accepted, and raised as such by the families. He forbade the selling of women into marriage. He forbade adultery, which was defined in the Mongolian tradition as relations between married people of separate households. So you could, if you're in your own household, that's fine, especially because, again, women outnumbered the men, so men tended to have more than one wife, but a man from this family could not have sex with a woman from this family. That was adultery, and that would lead to strife. He made animal rustling a capital offense. Could not steal animals from anybody else in the tribe. I mean, basically, we're one big-ass happy family, and we will like it. He forbade hunting during breeding time, from March to October. You could not hunt during the time when the steppe animals were replenishing themselves. He also made it so that when you did hunt, you had to use every part of the animal. You weren't allowed to waste anything. He also recognized religion as a major source of disruption, but rather than outlawing religion, he decreed that all religions were legitimate, and he proclaimed absolute total religious freedom. You were required to respect the religious choices of whoever you had contact with. Religion would not be a source of strife in the Khan's camp. And he made sure that no one, not even himself, was exempt from the law. It was believed to be a just Mongol. One had to live in a just community. We really, really need that today. And he implemented a postal service, which fell under the graces of the Khan and were vital to his military operations. The final conflict Genghis Khan had to resolve before turning his empire to expansion was the Shaman class. Now, religion was absolutely free. You could worship as you pleased. Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist. Genghis Khan. He was a shamanist. He worshipped the eternal blue sky. And he refused to let people turn that into a cult. Just because that's what he worshipped did not mean that's what you had to worship. But the head shaman, Teb Tengeri, tried to make himself and his 6 brothers exempt from many of the rules that applied to everybody else. And because the shaman class had upheld his claims, for a while he got away with it. The shamans at one point beat up Genghis Khan's brother Khasur, the same Khasur who had helped him to kill his bullying older brother. When Khasur went to Genghis Khan complaining, Genghis Khan mocked him as a weakling. Khasur went to their mother, who lived a day's journey away. She promptly rode over and gave Genghis Khan hell because she's his mama, and that's what she's going to do. Berated him for turning his back on family. I mean, I understand trusting bonds of loyalty, but Khasur had been loyal to him. Yes, he was family, but he'd been a loyal family. So she berated him for that. Khasur was reinstated. Now, not too long after this, Holin died, most likely of natural causes. There's no indication in history that it was anything other than just She was 50, and that was not an unusual time for an elder woman to die at that time. Traditionally, all of her belongings should have been inherited by Genghis Khan's youngest brother, Temujin Achagan. He was the hearth son. The youngest son is the one who is tasked with caring for Holin in her old age, and he was set to inherit everything. Teb Tengari, however, seized her property. As the administrator of her estate, he had this authority, and it should have simply been formality, and he should have immediately turned this over to Temujin Achagan. He did not. He tried to keep it. Fortunately, at this point, Borte stepped in. She pointed out that if the shaman would be this cavalier with Holin's estate, what did Genghis Khan think they would do with his estate on his passing? Did he want his own wife and children to be bereft of property and left to starve? Ladies, a good man will always listen to your advice and heed it. And Genghis Khan did. The next time Teb Tengari appeared in court, Temujin Achagan grabbed him as he walked by. Genghis Khan pretended they were just wrestling and told him to take it outside, where Temujin Achagan promptly broke Teb Tengari's back. Temujin was apparently a very good wrestler. Teb Tengari was left to die, and the Shaman class were put in their place. But now the Mongolian horde needed a new enemy to fight. One conveniently presented itself when a delegation arrived from the Jurched, saying that he was the leader of the Jurched was the Golden Khan, and demanded tribute from Genghis Khan. This did not end well for the Jurched. See, the Jurched, their power was not in military might. It lay in controlling the flow of goods to Mongolia. So Mongolia being kind of off the beaten path, you had to cross the Gobi Desert to get to it, and it had a natural boundary. So he thought he had all the power because he was right there on the Silk Road. He had all the goods. He could control those. Genghis Khan was like, challenge accepted. And he turned his military genius to the truly innovative and horrifying. See, even when he was fighting the other steppe tribes, his goal was to preserve Mongolian life. That's why he took out the aristocracy, who might come back for revenge, but left the peasant class to join him and become part of something greater. Because the peasants just want to be left alone, right? I mean, they're happy to fight, but they mostly just want to be left alone. They don't have that pride of place that the aristocracy has. So and this remained his primary goal. Throughout every conflict he ever had, his goal was to preserve Mongolian life. He wanted his warriors to return home safely. The other side, however, is fair game. And so he used the peasants surrounding the town to take the town. And this became a pattern everywhere he went. He had peasants cutting down wood to create engines of war, trebuchets, catapults, etc. He used the peasants to literally fill the moat. I mean, he would have the peasants walk into a moat surrounding a town so that his own men could march over them. Additionally, while the Jurched might expect the peasants to in some way fight on his side, maybe they were even conscripted into an army, the average Jurched diet, being they were townies, included a great deal more grain. And so the Mongols were just bigger, and they were almost solid muscle. Their diet was almost pure protein and fat, so they were big. The Mongolian horde was entirely cavalry. They were very mobile, and their primary weapon was a very powerful short bow. So they were armed and mounted cavalry. Well, that was redundant. Cavalry means mounted. But anyways, so they were armed and effective. This became increasingly important as they turned their sights west and start looking towards Europe. But if preserving Mongolian life was his number one priority, avenging those wrongfully slain was a very close second. Killed in war is one thing. I mean, he understands people fall in battle. That's what happens, right? But when he sends ambassadors to a country, and he always sent ambassadors first, he tried to go peacefully. It's not his fault that the people he was reaching out to were idiots who didn't believe in diplomacy. Incidentally, diplomatic immunity was one of the traditions started by Genghis Khan. All right, even countries that he was fighting with, if you came in under a diplomatic banner, you were immune from harm. He would make sure that you were safe. He started that. When he sends ambassadors to a country, like Khwarezm, for example, he expects them to return alive and unharmed. So in 1222, when Genghis Khan sends his ambassadors to try and establish trade with the Sultan of Khwarezm, he did not react well when the Sultan looted the trade caravan and disfigured the faces of the ambassadors. Did not end well for Khwarezm. The Mongolian horde first overtook Bukhara and then sent screaming peasants in advance to warn other cities along the Silk Road of the coming horrors. And I think that among the reasons Genghis Khan went down as such a villain in the history books is not so much his proven track record of conquest. I mean, there have been plenty of conquerors who are not reported as such villains. Or, I mean, some of them are, right? But still, most of them tend to be admired, like, Frederick of Barbarossa, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. They're not reported as such villains. The problem with Genghis Khan is he didn't care if you were aristocracy. Or rather, if you were aristocracy, you were number one on his hit list with a bullet, or an arrow in this case. Whenever the horde took a town, it was invariably the aristocracy that was slaughtered. Additionally, while Genghis Khan thought Mongol slaving a Mongol was evil, if you were not a Mongol, you were fair game for the slave trade. The peasants might be taken for slaves, but generally, if you were just your average run-of-the-mill peasant, you'd probably be left alone, because he wanted that trade, so people had to be in the town to trade with. But if you were a skilled craftsman, you could be conscripted into the horde to create whatever your trade was. The Mongols knew war. That's what they knew. They knew hunting, because a lot of his war tactics were based on hunting tactics from the steppe. But war was what they were good at. They didn't know anything else. They didn't know metalworking, pottery, tanning, leathercraft. They knew war. And so there was a dearth of craftsmen on the steppe until the Mongols started conscripting them. But the aristocracy, they served no purpose. He did not see the point in holding somebody for ransom only to release them and have them come back later and try to kill you. He knew the peasants just wanted to be left alone. So he killed the aristocracy, kidnapped the craftsmen, left the peasants alone. Genghis Khan died in the summer of 1227. Unlike most other kings, and maybe because he was a shamanist, he was very aware of his own mortality, having lived with it since his earliest days. I mean, when the Taiuchi had abandoned his family, they were very, that's a bad thing. You're being abandoned, you're being left to die. In an effort to stave off the fighting he knew would surely come once he was dead, Genghis Khan held a Kurultai for the family to see which of his 4 sons would take over. And while there may have been some doubt about the parentage of Jochi, I think he was undoubtedly Genghis Khan's favorite, because his initial thought was to make Jochi his heir. However, when he turned to Jochi to hear Jochi's thought, this was thought to be indicative of where his mind lay as to who should inherit. His second-born son, Chagatai, brought up the old family scandal, hinting that no one would follow Jochi if they could not be sure that Jochi was, in fact, Genghis Khan's son. And while Chagatai undoubtedly wanted the position for himself, the compromise was met to give the title of Great Khan to the third son, Ogedei. Genghis Khan, wanting to see how his sons did in leadership, began sending them off in military campaigns, with Jochi being sent west, Chagatai and Ogedei being sent to try and finish the conquest of China, and the youngest son, Tolui, staying in the Mongolian homelands because Tolui was the hearth son, now meant to take care of the family home where Borte was, although Borte had actually died a few years previously. So Tolui was maintaining the Mongolian homeland, basically. Jochi, sadly, died in early 1227, so he predeceased Genghis. However, his son, Batu, was quite capable of leading what would become known as the Golden Horde across Russia and into Eastern Europe. And with their light and fast horses and the greater range afforded by their powerful short bows, they made very short work of the Russian nobility, as related in the Novgorod Chronicles. Ogedei was a drunk and a prolific spender. By the time he died in 1241, he had burned through the vast wealth of the Mongolian horde, and he just burned through it. One of the distinguishing characteristics of the Mongolian steppe people is the acknowledgement that women were absolute equals. Now, there's a concept that still hasn't come to some parts of the West. While the men rode off and fought the wars, the women ruled at home, and the men were not allowed to second-guess the choices that the women made in their absence. Consequently, the women of the steppe were highly capable administrators. Following the death of Ogaday, his widow Toragine took over as regent. In an absolutely fascinating piece of history, her closest advisor was a Persian captive woman named Fatima. Toragine held the regency from 1241 until 1246, when she died unexpectedly. Poison is suspected, but nothing was ever proven. However, immediately upon her death, Fatima was seized and accused of being a witch. To ensure that none of her evil spirit escaped, the Mongolians stitched up every orifice she had. Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, woohoo. Rolled her into a heavy pelt and threw her into a river. So this powerful woman and advisor was gone. At this time, Ogaday's son Guyuk stepped into the position of Khan. Guyuk was a monster. He was cruel and abusive. While Genghis Khan outlawed torture, Guyuk used it as an everyday tool. His father, Ogaday, had tried to secure the Mongolian homeland from the harsh son Tolui and his lineage when Tolui died by forcibly marrying Guyuk to Tolui's widow Sorkatani. This failed. Sorkatani managed to say, no, this isn't going to happen, but Guyuk never forgave his aunt by marriage for her rejection. Fortunately, his reign was very short-lived. He died 2 years later, with his brother Ogul Gaimish holding the position for a bare 3 years from 1248 to 1251. So at this point, we have Yochi's son Batu with the Golden Horde terrorizing Russia and the eastern parts of Europe. Not wanting to risk losing what he had already gained in the west, Batu and his followers declined to return to the Mongolian steppe for the Kurultai. However, he fully supported Sorkatani's maneuvers against the descendants of Ogaday. Chagatai has gone south. His line eventually will form the Mughal Empire in India, but he also declined to return for the Kurultai, which left it between the descendants of Tolui, the descendants of Ogaday. Ogaday's line, nobody will follow them. By this point, his children have burned that bridge. Nobody's interested in seeing the Ogaday line continue. And Sorkatani had 4 sons, 4 very capable sons, all of whom would, at some point or another, lead the Great Horde. First up was the oldest Monkey, who ruled from 1251 to 1259. He directed his younger brother, the second-born Hulegu, to go south and conquer Persia and Iraq. And so this is when Hulegu led the Great Horde. He took him on a military excursion to Persia and Iraq, where he took Baghdad in less than 2 years. Now, Baghdad has only fallen twice in history, so it had been founded some 600 years earlier in like 600 something. The first time it fell was in 1253-ish, when Hulegu managed to take it down. The second time it fell was in 2003. So he did with horses and arrows what it took the United States Army tanks and airplanes to do. So that's what kind of military leader he was. Tribute flowed north. I mean, he took Baghdad and tribute flowed. When Monkey died, Hulegu followed his cousin Batu's decision not to return and created the Ilkhanate of Persia, meaning basically a vassal state, which ruled in one form or another until 1920. Sorkatani supported her youngest son at this point, Erik Boki. However, Kublai, the third-born, while not a warrior, did have the ability to inspire others to follow him, which he did. So Kublai took the title of Great Khan, and the legacy of Genghis Khan began its descent into present day. Now, it was a very slow descent, because Kublai was also a very capable administrator. And once the sibling rivalry between Kublai and Erik Boki was resolved, it turned out that Kublai, while maybe not his mother's favorite, as evidenced by her supporting of Erik Boki, was an apt pupil in the administration of an empire, and he began expanding the empire through trade. It had to be trade, because he wasn't much of a warrior. He was definitely not the warrior that his grandfather had been. He was overweight because he enjoyed the good life. He had developed gout because he loved alcohol and fine foods, but he did inherit that administrative talent from his grandfather and his mother, and the ability to appoint the right person to the right position. And the first thing he recognized was that there was no way to conquer China by force. It was too big, there were too many people, it couldn't be done. So Kublai chose to adopt the parts of Chinese culture that would make him acceptable to China and the common man, not the aristocracy. He also inherited his grandfather's disdain for the aristocracy. Among the steps he took to consolidate the Mongolian rule over China was posthumously granting Chinese names to his grandparents, Yasuge and Holun, for his grandfather Genghis Khan, and for each of Genghis Khan's 4 sons, and then proclaiming this was all part of his reign, named Yuan, meaning complete beginning. And this became the dynastic name for the Yuan dynasty, great origins. And while Kublai's uncle Ogedei tried to create a Mongolian capital in the heart of Mongolia, which was destined to failure because it was so far off the beaten path that it just wasn't practical. I mean, the trade routes couldn't get there easily. And that actually directly contributed to the draining of the treasury, because when traders did show up, he would grossly overpay for their courtesy in coming to see him at his capital in the heart of Mongolia. Kublai created a capital city in China, which became modern-day Beijing. And then he proceeded to rip apart the things the aristocracy held dear. Within Beijing, he created the Forbidden City, which was basically a way for the Mongolian royalty to continue living in gurs in the heart of civilized China. And within the Forbidden City, Mongolian women mingled freely with Mongolian men. And the Mongols rejected the elitist snobbery of Confucianism and thought foot binding was barbaric, refusing to practice it. So these were things that the aristocracy held dear, and the common people were like, yeah, that's dumb. His administration guaranteed property rights, they reduced taxes, they improved roads and communications. He ensured that the laws were consistent and consistently applied. He eradicated torture as barbaric and drastically reduced the number of crimes that resulted in execution, as well as the actual executions performed for those crimes that remained punishable by death. All of this made him very popular with the Chinese peasantry, and they flocked to him. Monetarily, he instituted one of the first forms of paper money. Strictly speaking, it wasn't brand new. I think Ogedei started it too, but because of his own spendthrift habits, he drained the treasury and inflation killed it. Inflation is not a good thing, all right? Kublai's policy of greatly increasing trade and technological innovations ensured a constant stream of gold, silver, and gems that ensured the paper money was fully backed by actual trade goods that could easily be exchanged for such. So the Mongols gave us capitalism, I guess. Knew there was a reason I liked them. Where traditionally peasants were at the bottom of the pecking order, subject to the whims of petty bureaucrats, Kublai upset that order a great deal. He organized the peasants into units of 50,000 each, and then gave those units broad authority over their lives. He's like, let's keep the bureaucrats out of this. You guys decide what's right for your area. But he encouraged literacy and education. And the Mongols, 500 years before this was even a thought in Europe, taught their peasants to read. And while they valued literacy and learning, they turned those pursuits to entertainment. While traditional Chinese society used literacy as a way to gatekeep who could function as administrators, the Mongolian Empire used literacy to entertain the people. During the Yuan dynasty, some 500 plays were written and performed, of which 160 survive and are performed to this day. Unlike any of his European counterparts, the Mongolians did not enjoy blood sport. While they enjoyed wrestling as a form of entertainment, public slaughter, so gladiatorial arenas, bear baiting, bullfighting, public execution, these were never touted as being entertainment in the Mongolian dynasty. And through these methods, without bloodshed, through propaganda and policy, Kublai Khan managed to conquer China, because the peasants and the warriors of the Sung dynasty abandoned the Sung dynasty in droves at a chance to live. But he was not a warrior. Under Kublai Khan, the Mongols tried twice to invade Japan. Both times weather caused the ships carrying the Mongolian army to sink. I mean, at one time they did manage to land and there was a battle, but the ship sank shortly after that, killing many thousands of Mongol warriors. They did try to take Java, but the Mongolian horde was instead ambushed and defeated. And so following Genghis Khan's death and the military conquest of his sons and grandsons, the Mongol expansion reached its maximum. So it had 4 corners, basically. He had Poland in the northwest, Egypt in the southwest, Java in the southeast, Japan in the northeast. Those were the 4 points of the Mongolian Empire, and that's where it stopped. But the world benefited from it tremendously. In 1287, Kublai Khan sent an emissary to the crowned heads of Europe. Rabban Bar Sama started out heading towards Jerusalem. He got as far as Baghdad when he was diverted to Europe. So he made a visit to the Mongolian Ilkhan in Persia, Emperor Andronicus II Palaeologus of Byzantium in Constantinople, the College of Cardinals in Rome, King Philip IV in France, and King Edward I of England. So he made this journey. Marco Polo may have traveled the Silk Road. Well, okay, he did. I put too much emphasis on may. He did travel the Silk Road. But Rabban Bar Sama traveled the entire Eurasian continent, a journey of some 7,000 miles one way. While he did not secure any treaties with this voyage, he opened up trade with Europe, and trade flourished. Roads were recognized as the fastest way of transporting military, but water was quickly discovered to be the fastest way to transport goods. And generally in the past, the aristocracy looked down on trade and commerce. I mean, it's okay to inherit wealth, but God forbid you work for it. But the Mongols didn't see it that way. Well, for the aristocracy in Europe or China, all thought education for the elites was fine, but working for a living was beneath them. The flip side of that was the feudal system in Europe, which disliked trade, not because they thought work was beneath them, but because they thought each kingdom and feudal manor should be able to stand on its own. And reliance on imported goods represented failure at home. And isolationism, while a fine policy in theory, trade makes the world go round, and we all need to work together. Nobody gets off the planet alive. The Mongols knew this. Where there is honest trade, there is seldom warfare. And they used that knowledge to create a global capitalist empire built on mutual desire for wealth, knowledge, and advancement. Accordingly, through the trade routes opened and safely maintained by the Mongolian Empire, Europe was introduced to silk satin, silk damask, and muslin. Now, these things were actually known in Europe well before then. I mean, they may not have had much contact with China, but they were aware of the trade goods that came out of there. But under Mongolian rule, these goods flooded Europe. Enter a small but growing middle class of tradesmen on the European continent. And these tradesmen became a growing middle class. And it's around this time that the church stopped being the center of the universe and the market became the center of the universe. Now, playing cards, paper stock, spices, porcelain technology, agricultural improvements, all of fashion, all flowed freely to Europe, who suffered almost nothing of the original Mongolian conquests, but they were happy to accept the trade goods, which contributed to the end of feudalism. This goofy-ass hat. Prior to contact with the Mongols, the men in Europe dressed very similar to the women. All right, they all wore basically ankle-length gowns. While the Mongolians didn't have anything directly to export to the world, war being their number one ability, their fashion quickly made the rounds. So the men went from wearing ankle-length gowns to wearing pants and tunics as separate items, and the women adopted a hat. In Europe, this is called a hennin. All right, this is the prince's hat as seen in most, medieval movies of some sort. I mean, I think most people probably became familiar with it from Sleeping Beauty, the animated version, where they wear these goofy-ass tall hats that go out to here and stuff. And this is from Mongolia. There was an article from the Smithsonian, I'll link it in the description below. In Mongolia, it's called a bokta, and it is worn exclusively by women. In Europe, they adopted it as the hennin, and it became, of course, a status symbol because you can't walk around with this goofy-ass thing that's falling off your head if you have to work for a living. So Mongolia influenced everything. The Mongols made culture portable, and this is a direct quote from the book because it's brilliant. They made culture portable, and they searched for what worked best, and when they found it, they spread it to other countries. They didn't begrudge knowledge the way some people do. The beginning of the end started between 1328 and 1332. During that time, 4 new members of the Golden family sat on the Khan's chair, each of them dying horribly. The same roads that made conquest so easy and became the lifeblood of the trade that fueled the empire also made the spread of plague lightning fast. And from the heart of the Mongolian Empire in Beijing, the Bubonic Plague spread across Europe and Asia and the African continents, wiping out millions and reducing global population anywhere from 30 to 50%, depending on where you're at. And entire towns were wiped out. This was a genuine plague, all right? Millions killed. And once the center fell out of the Mongolian Empire, the satellites dissolved, and the Mongolian Empire began a slow collapse. The descendants of Chagatai held out in the Mughal Empire until the 19th century. I think it was 1857 that they finally collapsed when Queen Victoria came in and was pronounced Empress of India. The Ilkhanate in Persia lasted until about 1920. The Golden Horde in Russia fell apart almost immediately. The troops combined with the Turks there, and history began to turn on Genghis Khan. And it wasn't immediate. For a while, the stream of gold and commerce was remembered in Europe when the land routes had been closed as a result of warfare and the rise of new empires, the Safavid, the Ottomans. Christopher Columbus sought to re-establish contact by sea, but with the Renaissance in Europe, it was all over. Christian and European arrogance could not allow that this golden age had started in Asia. And in seeking to establish European dominance over history, and yes, all right, there are some things that are very valid, and this is one of those valid complaints. Europe tried to establish their own dominance over world history, and the scientists came up with the scientific explanation for why Asians, especially Mongols, were inferior classes of humanity. And that idea held sway all the way through the communist conquest of Mongolia. And it wasn't until Soviet Russia fell and the archaeologists in Mongolia were allowed to have intellectual curiosity about the Great Khan, the history started to be unearthed. The book itself initially surfaced early in the 20th century. Maybe it would have been the late 19th century. But one of the best things that Genghis Khan ever could have done to secure his legacy was insisting on creating a written language to go with the oral tradition of a shamanistic culture. The book, called The Secret History of the Mongols, was an ancient Mongolian text that was discovered, like I said, late 19th, early 20th century. And it was very slowly, because much like English today is nothing like English from 1,000 years ago, the Mongolian language also transmuted and changed over the last 1,000 years. So it was very slowly translated into a modern language that could be read. And from this, and from justifiable national pride, we now know more about Genghis Khan than was ever assumed by the scientists of the 19th century. To put his achievements in perspective, Genghis Khan was born illiterate. He was a very poor tribesman. In his lifetime, never mind what his descendants accomplished, in his lifetime, he took an entirely illiterate people and gave them books. They were a shamanistic people relying on oral tradition to tell their tales. And before he died, he had created an alphabet and a written form of the Mongolian language. And then he used that alphabet to create written laws which applied to everybody. He took custom and turned it upside down, and the world was never the same. And that's why I say sometimes history is rewritten by very sore losers. And that's why, rather than being known as somebody who spread culture like dandelion fluff on the wind, Genghis Khan is remembered as the terror of the world. Most conquerors die in bloody, awful conflict, or through direct assassination, usually at a young age. Genghis died at the comparatively old age of 65. He did not die in battle. He died at home, surrounded by family, and was buried in secret, so that those who would degrade his memory could never degrade his remains. They still don't know where he was buried. He was taken into the heart of Mongolia, and it became a forbidden zone. People weren't allowed to enter there all the way up until the communists took over, and then the communists maintained it because they didn't want him to become a symbol and source for the Mongolians to rise up against communist rule. And this is easily one of my favorite history books ever. It reads like a novel and has so much information, it was hard to pick out what not to include in this review. It brings to life and light one of history's most maligned warriors and a leader that we could desperately use today. Genghis Khan still gets a bad rap from historians. People who should really know better still write books about how horrible he was, and he wasn't. He cared about his people. And that's what a good leader should do, should care about his people. The author of this book, Jack Weatherford, is one of the world's foremost leading experts on tribal culture. The president of Mongolia granted him the Order of the Polar Star in Mongolia for his work on unearthing and showing a history of Genghis Khan that is not just what a monster he was to the West, but what he did for the world. It's a hell of a legacy. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I will see you all next week.